Okie dokie. We are going to be on page 11 of the Unit 8 packet. We're going to be on a page called Absolute Value. There's a picture here of a boy who's exasperated. That was copy and pasted from the old textbook. I just thought it was a funny picture. I put it in there. There's no real connection between this picture and the lesson today. All right, here we go. What is absolute value? So I mentioned this in the last video, and we've mentioned this last time, is that absolute value relates to distance. Okay? It is the distance between any number and 0 on the number line. And of course, remember, distance is always positive. So if absolute value measures distance, that means absolute value is positive, except for 0, which is not positive or negative. Okay? So we're going to work with this idea today called absolute value. We're also going to think about this idea of opposites. Okay? Now, opposite numbers are the same distance from 0. They're just in opposite directions. So let's find some opposites. So let's find the opposite of -5. Well, -5 on the graph would be right here. Okay? And -5 is 5 away from 0. Its distance is 5 units. I'll just put 5u. So here's 0 right here. That's like the key number. So what other number is also 5 units away from 0? Well, it's pretty clear that it would be 5. Okay? Because 5 is also 5 units from 0. So the opposite of -5 is +5. Now that seems like really clear, but it's also important to understand, like, it's not just because like one has positive, one is negative. It's that they're the same distance from 0. That's going to be key. All right, let's try to find the opposite of 4. Well, here's 4, +4. How far is 4 from 0? 4 is 4 units away from 0. So what other number is 4 units away from 0? That would be -4. -4 is also 4 units away from 0. So it says the opposite of 4 is -4 because it's the same distance to 0. So this is kind of now pretty straightforward here. What's the opposite of 3? Well, 3 is 3 away from 0. -3 is also 3 away from 0. So those would be opposites. They're both the same distance from 0. Now this is an interesting question. What is the opposite of the opposite of -2? Well, the opposite of -2 would be 2. But then the opposite of that would be -2. So the opposite of the opposite is just the same number. It's like saying, if you're looking at the graph, here's -2. The opposite of 2 is 2, and then the opposite of that is just back to -2. So that's just an interesting question there. So anytime you have the opposite of the opposite, it's just the same number. It's just the same number. Okay. So now we're going to get into absolute value and how to write it and how to show it. The absolute value of a number is the distance between the number and 0. So you can see here, we kind of did this one before. -4 is 4 units from 0. +4 is 4 units of 0. To show absolute value or the distance to 0, we use these like 2 vertical lines. This, you would read that as the absolute value of 4 is 4. The absolute value of -4 is also 4. These are both 4 because they're both the same distance from 0. Okay? And this, again, right here is just how to read that. So just a couple examples here on the side. So if you were to say like the absolute value of 9, notice that when I did my vertical lines, I made them sort of a little bit longer than 9, because if you make them the same length, it looks just like 191, and you don't want that. So when you write absolute value lines, which again is the distance to 0, you use these vertical lines. So this means absolute value of 9. What it's really saying is, what's the distance between 9 and 0? 9 is 9 away from 0. Let's do another one. So like negative 6, let's say. What this is saying is, well, what's the distance between negative 6 and 0? What's the absolute value of negative 6? And that would just be positive 6, because distance, remember, distance is always positive. Positive. All right, let me show you one weird example that you probably won't see very much, but I do want to show you this. So let's say we had the negative absolute value of 3. Now, absolute value is the distance between a number and 0. Absolute value is always positive. But you notice here that there's a negative sign outside of the absolute value. So to think about this, we'd think, well, what's the absolute value of 3? The absolute value of 3 is 3, but we want the opposite of that. We want the negative of that. So in this case, it would be negative 3. Because even though absolute value of 3 is 3, the negative is outside of the absolute value. Okay? So that's just a little example to keep in mind as we go through this unit. Now, you might be thinking, like, when would we ever use this absolute value? And we'll be looking at some word problems on the opposite page, which will help us think, like, when would this come in handy? All right, absolute value of negative 7. The first thing I'm going to do is write it out. All we're finding is what's the distance between negative 7 and 0, and that would be just 7. Because distance is always positive, that's going to be positive. Notice the negative sign is not outside. The negative sign is inside the absolute value, which would make this positive. All right, let's look at an expression here. We have absolute value of 5 plus the absolute value of negative 6. Notice I'm writing these out first, of course. Let's look at each one of these. Absolute value of 5, distance from 5 to 0 is positive. It's going to be 5. Absolute value of negative 6, the distance to negative 6 and 0 is also 6. 5 plus 6 would be 11. So here's an example for that one. Let's say you had the ocean, right? It's sea level 0. You had a bird that was 5 feet above, and you had a fish that was negative 6 or 6 feet below, which would be negative 6. You got a fish. There it is. If you were to try to find the distance between them, you would add their absolute values. The bird is 5 feet away from sea level. The fish is 6 feet away from sea level. If we add those distances together, that means they're 11 feet apart. So that's just a little example for that one. Okay. Let's try this one here. We got negative 7 minus, or absolute value of negative 7 minus absolute value of 3. Well, let's look at each one of these. Absolute value of negative 7, what's the distance of negative 7 to 0? It's going to be 7. Minus, what's the distance between 3 and 0? It's going to be 3. 7 minus 3 is 4. Okay, okie dokie. I'll show you a quick example of that too. So negative 7, you got something that's a fish that's, can't really go with that much deeper. That's negative 7. And you got a bee, let's say a bumblebee. There's a bee. It's a terrible drawing. Actually, it's pretty good. That's 3 feet above. Well, what you're comparing now is how much farther is the fish below sea level than the bee is above sea level. How much farther from sea level is the bee? Well, the bee is 7 feet away from sea level. The fish. The fish is 7 feet away from sea level. The bee is 3 feet away from sea level. That means the fish is 4 feet farther from sea level than the bee. Sorry. Shouldn't have changed up the bee and the bird. So those are just a couple examples where you actually would use absolute value, the distance to 0, to help you think about like comparing two things. All right, let's take a look at a couple more examples here. So these three, you can try, if you want to try these three on your own, that would be awesome. So if you want to pause it, or if you want to just kind of go ahead of me and try those, why don't you practice those? But I'll do these as well. So absolute value of 14, I would just write that out. Absolute value is positive because it's measuring distance, so that's just going to be 14. Okay. Absolute value of negative 9 plus absolute value of 3. Negative 9, the distance to 0 would be 9. Plus distance from 3 to 0 would be 3. These are both positive, of course. Distance is always positive. 9 plus 3 would be 12. So I like to think about this like this is like a fish is 9 feet below. You got a bird 3 feet above. How far apart are they? You would use absolute value. They're 12 feet apart. Okay. We'll look at an example like that momentarily, actually. All right. We got absolute value of negative 8 minus absolute value of negative 2. How far is negative 8 from 0? It would be 8. Minus how far is negative 2 from 0? That'd be 2, both positive. Now we're keeping this is it looks like a minus sign, or a negative sign, but it's just subtracting. So not everything becomes positive. So if it's outside the absolute value, then you just keep it. 8 minus 2 would be 6. So I'm just going to do a quick picture of that too. So here's sea levels, 0. 8 feet below, so you got a fish 8 feet below. Okay. And you got something else 2 feet below. So maybe octopus. I wish I didn't pick octopus because I don't know how I'm going to draw this. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. So what this is saying is the fish is 8 feet below. It's 8 feet from sea level. The octopus is 2 feet from sea level. How much farther is the fish? Subtracting them will compare that distance. The fish is 6 feet farther below sea level than the octopus, or whatever that is. Looks more like a mop, but there you go. All right, let's look at an example kind of like that right here. A seagull is flying 25 feet above sea level. Nevaeh is diving 15 feet below sea level. What is the distance between Nevaeh and the seagull? So we've kind of done examples like this before. Let's do a little drawing first. So I want you to draw this with me here. Got sea level, you got 0. 25 feet above, there's the seagull. So we're going to put that seagull above sea level. 25 feet. Right below is Nevaeh, who's diving. So there's Nevaeh. There she is. She's doing some diving. 15 feet below. So it would be negative 15 feet from sea level. So we're going to compare these two. All right, we're going to find the distance between them. So we're going to use absolute value because distance is positive. All right, let's check this out. So we're going to definitely use absolute value here because we're finding distance. But are we going to add their absolute values? Are we going to add their distances to 0, or are we going to subtract them? So it looks like we're going to add them because the distance of the bird to sea level is 25. The distance of sea level to Nevaeh is 15. We'd add those together to get their total distance. So we're going to add these. Okay. So absolute value of 25 is 25 plus absolute value of 15. The distance of Nevaeh to sea level is 15. 25 plus 15 would be 40 feet. So they're 40 feet apart, which the drawing helps show that they're 40 feet apart. All right, just a couple practice ones, and we'll be all set here. What is the opposite of 0? Well, it's a good one. Because since 0 is not positive or negative, the opposite of 0 is just 0. What is the opposite of 6? Now, we saw one like that before. The opposite of 6 is negative 6. But then the opposite of that would just be back to 6. So it's the opposite of the opposite is just that number. So the answer here would be 6. All right, again, if you want to try these three on your own, if you want to kind of go ahead of me, that's fine. I'm going to try them as well. Absolute value of negative 5, I'll write it out first. Absolute value is always positive unless it's 0, so that's going to be just 5. Distance of negative 5 to 0 is 5. Always talking about distance here with absolute value. All right, let's try this one. So you got 20, positive 20, absolute value positive 20 minus absolute value of negative 3. Okay, this is kind of like you have this one's kind of interesting. So to me, at least, you have the ocean here. You got a bird 20 feet above. You got a fish 3 feet under. If you're subtracting these, let's see what we get. Let's think about what it means. So absolute value of 20 would be 20. Minus absolute value of -3 would be 3, because the distance of -3 to 0 is 3. 20 minus 3 is 17. Well, what would 17 mean for this? It looks like it would be something like the bird is 17 feet further away from sea level than the fish. That's what that would mean if you subtracted those. If you added them, what would that tell you? If you added these, you'd get 23, which would be the distance between them. But if you subtract them, you get like how far is one away from sea level than the other. All right, let's check this one out. Absolute value of -16 plus the absolute value of -12. Absolute value of -16 is 16, positive. Absolute value of -12 is 12, because it's distance, it's going to be positive. 16 plus 12 is 28. Now let's think about that one. So let's say you have two fish. One is 16 feet below, -16, that's the fish. You got another fish too, also below. Well, not a fish. Let's do, oh boy, an eel? Let's say that's an eel. That's -12. Okay. So what does that 28 mean here? It's not that the fish is 28 feet farther under. It's like their combined distances from sea level. If you can combine how far away the eel is plus how far away the fish is, you get 28. So that one doesn't have much meaning, but that's what it would be. All right, last one. A game show contestant lost 15 points. That's the key word there. He answered another question incorrectly and lost another 15 points. How many total points has he lost? Okay, well, so lost 15 would be -15. Lost another 15 would be -15. So you might be thinking, like, why would we use absolute value here? How many total points has he lost? We wouldn't, that answer wouldn't be negative. We would say maybe he lost, however many points he lost. If we say he lost negative, this is going to be tough to explain, but if he lost -3, that means he actually won -3. So if you lose negative points, that's a good thing, because that means you're gaining if you're losing negative. So I know it's kind of a weird explanation, but we want to know how many points he lost. So we're going to use absolute value here. So would we add or subtract? He lost 15 and he lost another 15. How many total did he have? If we subtracted these, we'd get 0. And it seems like he'd get more than 0. So I think we'd add them to find the total points lost. Absolute value of -15, 15, plus absolute value of -15 would be 15. Add those together. So then the contestant lost 30 points. Okay? Which is kind of like this one. Like if you had two things that were 15 feet below sea level, and you were asking, like, what's the total distance between the two things from sea level, you would add them up. All right. Hope you enjoyed absolute value. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.